I am a strange person and I choose very random hills to die on. Romance shows represent a large percentage of those hills. I am very particular about what romance shows I find not cringy and even more particular about the ones I find good. As such, last year I decided to piss against the wind and express my extreme distaste with the largely loved series Tonikawa. And while I have zero regrets despite the clear like to dislike ratio, there is one thing that I wish to add. A counterexample. You see, the one objection people bring again and again is that Tonikawa is a new concept, a fresh take, something different. Strangers to married couple, groundbreaking. I concede it is an unusual formula. But allow me to present to you a similar series that, in my opinion, suffers from none of the many faults that I had with Tonikawa. The name is Sesame Salt and Pudding, and I need to see this animated yesterday. Fukunaga Haruhi, 22 years old and former Bachelorette. She's living in Tokyo and works as a heavy machine operator at a construction site. She's well loved by all of her coworkers and secretly pines for Ogino, who she and every other female employee there have the hots for. He's determined off limits by all of the women though, so no touching allowed.
Touch! Don't touch!
But wait a second, did I say former Bachelorette? You heard me right, because after waking up from a drunken bender one morning, she finds her apartment is also occupied by a much older man. Tsunohara Nagato, a 42-year-old calligrapher out of a job and without a place to stay. Or Osan, if you prefer. It turns out that the night before, Haruhi was at an izakaya ranting to the patrons about her family problems. Ryuji, her dad, has been constantly bugging her about moving back home so she can help his construction business. But she loves working with heavy machinery, which wouldn't be possible if she left Tokyo. For her father, the only acceptable reason for her to stay in the city would be if she was married. A human rights violation, clearly. All of the patrons are on her side, and she tries to figure out a way out of this mess. Thanks to alcohol.
The cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
She comes up with a great plan. Marry someone at the izakaya. Everyone there is on board with this idea and she asks the first single man there. The man just so happened to be an equally drunk Nagato.
Bachelor party phase 1 is over.
Unfortunately for the two of them, they actually signed the marriage registration form and sent it in. Now naturally their first thoughts are along the lines of oh shit, oh fuck, and we need to get a divorce.
Divorce? I knew we had something in common. Here, sign these.
But after getting to know each other and their situations a bit more, they decide to take a less conventional path to divorcing. Because Haruhi still needs to convince her father to let her stay in Tokyo, she wants Nagato to continue being her fake husband. If her father is convinced that the marriage is legit, then that would mean she can continue her dream of working with those big machines. In exchange, Nagato can stay at Haruhi's apartment until he finds a job and a place of his own. Nagato agrees to this and even volunteers to be a house husband while not working, but sets up a few ground rules. First of all, her place needs to be cleaned up because there's no way he's going to live there if it continues to look like a pigsty and she continues to act like a food waste terrorist. Having actual food that's not from a convenience store or potentially lethal is quite important, to say the least. And second, Haruhi needs to be aware of the fact that she's living with a man. For starters, she can't be walking around in her underwear whenever she feels like it. And that's because somebody's meat scepter might be reacting to it. After all, he decided to follow her home in the first place because he was attracted to her. And he isn't quite the Osan that she originally thought he was. Hey, at least he's being honest. These demands pain Haruhi, but because she did technically marry him, compromises need to be made. From here, the two begin their lives as newlyweds/roommates where they try to navigate the difficulties that have resulted from it. As they spend more and more time around each other, Haruhi and Nagato start to develop a genuine interest and attraction in each other, and they even start to consider staying married.
A great success!
I know what many of you are probably thinking right now. Weren't you the one who criticized Tonikawa for having a romance with an age gap? And the relationship here sounds a lot worse than the relationship between Nasa and Tsukasa, who are only 2 years apart rather than 2 decades. Sure, you could look at it that way. Never mind the fact that you're comparing jailbait to an adult, but there's a reason why this age gap actually works. For me at least. The relationship between Haruhi and Nagato is one built upon respect for each other. Nagato is not a predatory man. He is attracted to Haruhi and he does have a sex drive, but that doesn't automatically mean he would try to take advantage of her. He's strict and he can be a bit too honest with what he's thinking, but wouldn't you prefer that over someone who's a slob and is completely shut off from the rest of the world? Nagato dreams of opening his own calligraphy school, but that doesn't mean he'll push reality away either. He manages to find a decent job with a modest income and helps around the house as much as he can. And Haruhi is pretty mature and competent for her age. Well, in some ways.
Trash man!
Like, yes, she is a bit of a mess and eats whatever garbage food she can find. Her apartment is almost always a disaster unless she's forced into cleaning it by Nagato. But Haruhi is also an extremely diligent worker and loves what she does. She's very outgoing and gets along with not only those in her age group, but everyone around her. Just like Nagato, she also has a dream of being someone that everyone can look up to. Because those two have different personalities and lifestyles, it's natural that they're going to butt heads with one another. But those differences are similar to how real couples can have very different personalities but still work through them. They might fight and argue about certain topics, but that doesn't mean that they can't love each other. How can they manage all of this, you may ask? Well, it's a certain thing called communication. Like any romance story out there are plenty of opportunities for Haruhi and Nagato's relationship to fall apart because of the dreaded misunderstanding. You know the drill. One partner hears or sees something that's potentially but doesn't bother to confront the other about it until the last possible second. And until that moment comes, they avoid the other partner and have their worries eat away at them. Meanwhile, the other one will try and reach out but will continue being rejected or be unsure what the hell they did wrong in the first place. This would be enough to piss off any real person to the point that they genuinely leave the relationship, but that's not the case here.
Thank fucking Lord.
Just like in Horimiya and Worakoi, Haruhi and Nagato are mature and level-headed enough to know that they should talk about their problems rather than run away from them.
Get your ass back here, boy!
And sure enough, that's what they do. They give each other the love and kindness they need, and they support each other's dreams and ambitions too. Their relationship gets physical later in the manga, which is always a plus to see done in a genuinely sweet and healthy way. Analysis Panda chiming in because I have some deeper thoughts and opinions. I think that the men revolving around Haruhi are an interesting commentary on the men many women in real life get to pick from. For one, we have the childhood friend Hibiki. He knows everything about her, he's slightly younger, and works in the same domain. He's the past. He represents the first crush, the immature love that demands without giving back. Hibiki is the kind of lover who can't look at himself objectively and has blind faith that everything will work out without regards to actual chemistry. There's also Haruhi's coworker and crush Ogino. He spends a lot of time around Haruhi. He gets to see her everyday mannerisms and gets a sense of her personality even though he doesn't know her past. He works in the same field as her but has the mystique of a senpai.
Notice me, senpai! Notice me!
Ogino feels like the kind of senpai that you'd date in college. Your paths crossed and he's the guy who's there at the right time. He's Haruhi's present. But as you get to know the mysterious senpai, you discover he isn't as cool as you thought. He's just another dude. Which leads you to the third man. Nagato knows nothing about Haruhi at first. They sort of end up together, although they have nothing in common and they're not each other's type. He's the sexy stranger you meet in a bar or bookstore depending on who you are, and you're seemingly opposites. You tell yourself you don't like him, but you're strangely drawn to him. The more Haruhi talks to Nagato, she discovers they have the same worldview and hopes for the future. There's a mutual sense of respect between them and they make a great team. They're open about their flaws and the ways they can help each other with those flaws from the very beginning. Nagato represents the future. Ogino and Hibiki are both more traditional men who expect to be able to bend Haruhi to their own will. Ogino is verbally forceful and has outdated beliefs. Hibiki is physically forceful and believes in a transactional relationship, what he can offer her versus what other men can offer her. Nagato doesn't have the same resources or youthful zeal, but he is more mature. He recognizes that he's the best at supporting Haruhi emotionally rather than economically, and it's because he can understand her emotionally so well that he recognizes a provider is not the kind of man she's looking for. Nagato has high emotional intelligence, and I'm always happy to see men like him in manga. Begone, I don't get women, I'm happy if you're happy kind of men. Make way for this smarty silver fox. Of course, there's still that whole age gap thing going between them. Does this series try to just brush it aside as if it were no big deal? Well, I wouldn't love this story as much as I do if it pulled a cop-out like that, now would I? The age gap between Nagato and Haruhi is never portrayed as something that can be easily brushed off. Almost every character that learns about Nagato and Haruhi's relationship immediately questions it for a variety of reasons, with the biggest opponent being Haruhi's father. I won't be spoiling anything here, but later on when we learn the reason behind his disapproval, we understand why he feels the way he does. The conversations between Haruhi's father and Nagato actually sound like two 40-year-old men talking, and they're a delight. And would you believe it that this actually works too? Who'd have thought? So why is no one talking about this series? Seriously, it's one of the few josei that I've read that show their characters being actually capable of emotional maturity. And as I complained on Twitter a few days ago, I always appreciate reading a josei that is not just shoujo with sex. As of the making of this video, Sesame Salt and Pudding has under 1,000 ratings on Mal and only 3 reviews. And for me, that's unacceptable. It's only 20 chapters long, which makes it short, sweet, and to the point with very little filler. The pacing is great, and you'll only wish that the series could have gone on for a little bit longer just so you can get more of those warm, fuzzy feelings. If you consider yourself a fan of romance, comedy, or wholesome stories in general, you need to check out Sesame Salt and Pudding A.S.A.P. More people need to see how even when a relationship can seem very unlikely, it's still possible for it to become a healthy and loving one. And everyone needs that kind of hope nowadays. See you all next time!